This is a powerful delivery by Bari Weiss, who you may have heard of. The most powerful quote from this speech, which he gives: a worldview that measures fairness by equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, a worldview that says that merit and excellence are suspicious, is a worldview that is fundamentally hostile to us and to every single value we stand for. Another quote: it means holding your leaders to account when they fail to deliver and not just following them blindly out of convenience or convention. This is a very powerful talk that she gives of us recognizing that we are now in a new world and we have to conduct ourselves accordingly, and that requires courage. Let's watch this.
When did you know? Looking back, now that we're on the far side, I wonder, when did you realize that things had changed? When did you know that the things we had taken for granted were suddenly out of reach? That the norms that felt as certain as gravity had disappeared? That the institutions that had launched our grandparents in this country had turned hostile to our children? When did you notice that what had once been steady was now shaky ground? Did you look down to see if your own knees were the ones that were trembling? When did you realize that we were not immune from history, but living directly inside of it? When did you see that our world was actually the world of yesterday, and that a new one with far fewer certainties, one where everything is up for grabs, was already coming into being? Maybe it was September 11th, 2001, when Islamist terrorists murdered 3,000 Americans. Maybe you noticed in the days afterward, as my friend Jonathan Rosen did, that an explosion of Jew hatred seemed to have ridden on the contrails of the airplanes that the jihadists had turned into weapons of mass destruction and aimed at the heart of American civilization. Or maybe it was the Second Intifada, in which everyday places, Mike's Place, Sabaro's, Cafe Moment, the Dolphinarium, became symbols for slaughterhouses, even as few of our would-be allies said their names. Or maybe it was on February 1st, 2002, when Al-Qaeda beheaded the journalist Daniel Pearl in Pakistan, as he spoke his final words: "I am a Jew. My mother is a Jew." Or maybe it wasn't until the Shabbat morning of October 27, 2018, when a neo-Nazi gunned down 11 Jews at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh while shouting, "All Jews must die." Or maybe it was the shooting 6 months later at the Chabad of Poway, because for Hannah Kay, who witnessed the murder of her mother Lori on that day, it surely was. Or maybe it was January of 2022, when a gunman held the congregants of Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, hostage. Or maybe it was before. Maybe it was the bombing of the Amia Center in Buenos Aires, the terror attack at the Chabad of Mumbai, the school shooting in Toulouse, or the murder of Sarah Halimi, an older woman who was thrown out of her apartment window in Paris. Maybe you don't remember, but French prosecutors decided to drop the murder charges against her killer, who had shouted Allahu Akbar, because those prosecutors said that he had been smoking weed. Maybe it was the rise of Jeremy Corbyn in England, or white supremacists marching through Charlottesville with their tiki torches. Maybe it was the anti-Semites at the helm of the Women's March. Or maybe it was the social consequences you suffered when you dared to notice them. Maybe, as it was for so many, it was the morning of October 7th, when Hamas terrorists came across the border into southern Israel on foot and on motorbike and by truck and by car and by paraglider to murder and maim anyone they could find. Maybe it was the fact that they had come armed with maps that had been drawn by Palestinians with Israeli work permits, who told them which home had children in it, who told them who owned a dog. But maybe even that wasn't enough. That was still over there. It wasn't here. Maybe it took until October 8th, when in Times Square, while terrorists were still roaming in Israel, people were cheering, exhilarated, jubilated at the news of Jewish death. Or perhaps it was the moral inversion in the days that followed, the Chicago chapter of Black Lives Matter using the symbol of a hand glider, a symbol of mass murder, as a sign of liberation. Or maybe it was when the heads of Harvard and Penn and MIT, who run schools that cater to the most minute of microaggressions, could not answer in the affirmative when they were asked if calling for the genocide of Jews qualified as bullying and harassment. Or maybe it was the fact that professors and Broadway producers were the ones that were tearing down posters of women and children and babies held captive by Hamas. Maybe it was after October 8th when you organized the march, and none of the people who post about being allies showed up. Maybe it was the physical attacks on Jewish students at Tulane, at the University of Pittsburgh, or at DePaul. Maybe it was the school shootings in Toronto and Montreal. Or maybe it was the now near daily assaults on the streets of Brooklyn against the most visible members of our community. But maybe it was more subtle than that. Maybe it was the quiet purging of proud Jews, like the novelist Alyssa Albert, who refuses to be quiet about Israel, from the arts, from museum boards, from human rights groups. Maybe it was watching what your children were learning in their ethnic studies class about Israel and about the history of the Jewish people. Maybe it was the mobs that gathered outside of Michael Rappaport's show in Chicago, calling him a racist Zionist, or the venue in Chicago that canceled a Matisyahu concert because they claimed they couldn't guarantee his safety. Or maybe you knew when you saw that an Orthodox Jewish man was shot while walking to shul a few Shabbats ago in Rogers Park in Chicago, only to be offered thoughts and prayers from the city's mayor. Or maybe it took the events of this past week, when Jews were hunted in the streets of Amsterdam, a pogrom in 21st century Europe. They called it a Jew hunt, and they texted about it. In one of the recordings, a victim of the attack jumps into one of Amsterdam's canals to escape his assailants. He is forced to say, "Free Palestine," as he treads water. His assailants laugh and jeer and call him a cancer Jew. Soon, I'm sure Columbia students are going to hold a protest on behalf of the pogromists. And if that seems like an exaggeration, consider the fact that yesterday, on Veterans Day, a group of them were camped out on the quad holding a memorial service for Sinwar. Now, perhaps at the time, each one of these discrete events felt like a nightmare or a flu, something terrible to be endured until in good time it would pass, until things would go back to normal, as they surely would. But those in this room whose parents or grandparents fled Tehran and Moscow and Beirut and Baghdad, they knew better. The Persians, the Russians, the Cubans in our community, they never didn't know. And that is because they come from a world where to be Jewish required knowing. They understood tyranny and threats to freedom because they had lived it. And they have been alive to the threats against us and against liberty that left too many comfortable American Jews sleepwalking over the past decades. I want to suggest to you that the task for us in this moment is to learn this state of mind and this state of being, the resilience, the vigilance, the mental strength, the courage, and the pride, not just to survive, but to thrive in this new world that we are living in. We must learn from those who never had the luxury of losing their instinct for danger. And that begins by articulating first to yourself and then out loud what you know, because only then can we get serious about what being in this new world requires of us. if you find yourself often asking the people around you, can you believe? Well, you need to ask yourself why reality is still catching you off guard. What little lies of omission, or lies told in the name of being politically correct or polite, are you telling yourselves, even today? Here's one. We told ourselves that multiculturalism and unfettered immigration were good because we had benefited from both, because they had made our own lives possible. But we need to get serious about their limitations, because what we're seeing right now in Europe is that people from profoundly anti-Semitic countries do not check their belief systems at the border of the Western world. Do you want to see what happens when people are too scared, too cowed to discuss that problem plainly? When they are too worried to say plainly that some cultures are more tolerant and inclusive than others? Look at what is happening to the Jewish community in Amsterdam. Look at what is happening to the Jewish community in London. And if you think what just happened in the Netherlands can never happen here, I urge you to take a very, very hard look at our history. We also need to get serious right now about who our allies really are, and to be able to say that some of the best defenders of our community, like Richie Torres and Douglas Murray, are not Jews themselves, but that some of the biggest sellouts of our community are. We need to level with ourselves. We need to level with ourselves, even if it's in private, and acknowledge that many of the institutions that have turned against our community were funded by members of our own community. Walk through a museum whose staff would never hire a Zionist curator and look at the names above the galleries. Walk in a university right now and look at the names on the buildings. Look at what's being taught there. How did this happen? We need to ask that as we build new institutions to make sure that we prevent that from ever happening again. We need to say out loud what we know to be true about different ideologies that are very chic right now in American life. One of them is this: a worldview that measures fairness by equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. A worldview that says that merit and excellence are suspicious is a worldview that is fundamentally hostile to us and to every single value that we stand for. We need to be able to say that the politics of the mob, from whatever side of the aisle, will always be dangerous for us, and that those who insist right now that the voice of the people or the voice of God are wrong. We need to talk about a legacy press that our community still reads religiously, but which lies about the things that we know to be true. The legacy press would have you believe that the hunt for Jews in Amsterdam was just a scuffle between football hooligans. That is no less a lie than suggesting that the phrase Sig Heil merely means hail victory. We need to say out loud that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop, and the idea that we need to indulge in panel discussions to debate that inside the Jewish community is perverse. We need to take the phrase globalize the Intifada seriously. It is not a fun rally chant. It is a call for violence against our community. What this moment requires is the truth, the hard, uncomfortable truth. It means not backing down from telling it to yourself and to others. It means holding your leaders to account when they fail to deliver, and not just following them blindly out of convenience or convention. It means realizing that good ideas and good people, they don't just win on their own. They need others to elevate them, to defend them, and to promote them. If all of this, if this moment that we're in feels deeply uncomfortable, that is because it is. As my friend Alana Newhouse says, if it feels like the end, that's because all beginnings do. If it feels like the end, that's what beginnings feel like. And all new beginnings feel uncomfortable. But we have choice in this end and in this beginning. We have agency, we have power, and we have the blessing to live in America. So we can continue to offer bromides about how the arc of history bends towards justice and how politics is a pendulum that naturally reaches its midpoint, and about history as a story of progress. Or we can accept that none of that is actually true, that we bend the arc of history, that the pendulum can go in all kinds of radical directions, and about history is never written in advance, that we write it. We can accept what this moment requires and figure out how to forge a world anew. My hero, and I'm sure many of yours, Natan Sharansky, said that there were two kinds of Jews in the Soviet Union. There were the Jews, and these were the majority maybe, who wanted to save the world. And they became communists and ended up enslaved and enslaving half the world. And then there were the Jews who wanted to save other Jews, who wanted to save themselves in their families. And these are the ones that we remember and elevate and honor as the refuseniks, the dissidents who refused to go along. They were the ones who ended up bringing down the Soviet Union and saving the free world. History is back. The old world, the old normal, it is not returning. It is on us to build the new one, and it is on us to ensure that it is free. Thank you so much.
Brilliant speech by Bari Weiss. And, we need to be willing to face different beliefs or ideas that we subscribe to, very often coming out of the pressures of society and us going along with it so that we look like decent people to the indecent society around us, and realize, no, to be a decent person is not to go with the flow. To be a decent person is to be a person who really stands for something, and that is always uncomfortable. The reason why the first Jew, Abraham, is called Avram HaIvri, Abraham on the other side, is because being a Jew is having the strength and the courage to live on the other side of what is popular, because truth is very rarely the popular thing.